Tonight, attack anniversary. President Biden lays out the stakes in the 2024 election by remembering the January 6th riot at the Capitol. Plus, all eyes on Iowa.
The Iowans here, they reward hard work.
The remaining Republican presidential candidates descend on the Hawkeye state ahead of the Iowa caucuses. And answering the call.
We're praying for each other. We're, we're encouraging each other and supporting when they needed it.
U.S. Navy SEALs lend a helping hand to Israeli soldiers on the war front. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The president, laying out the stakes of the election, targets his predecessor as the remaining Republican candidates duke it out in Iowa. Welcome to Faith Nation from our studio in Washington, D.C. I'm John Jessup. Well, President Biden's first campaign speech of 2024 comes one day before the 3-year anniversary of the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Speaking from Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, where George Washington's long winter encampment during the Revolutionary War forged a spirit of patriotism in America, the president targeted his predecessor's actions uncharacteristically, citing him by name, pointing to the run-up and the hours during the riot.
3 years ago tomorrow, we saw with our own eyes the violent mob storm the United States Capitol. For the first time in our history, insurrectionists had come to stop the peaceful transfer of power in America. The choice is clear. Donald Trump's campaign is about him, not America, not you. Donald Trump's campaign is obsessed with the past, not the future. He's willing to sacrifice our democracy, put himself in power. Our campaign is different.
President Biden will continue his campaign trail kickoff with a trip to South Carolina next week, the race that looks increasingly like a Biden-Trump rematch. Well, turning now to the Hawkeye state for the official kickoff of the 2024 GOP nominating race. The Iowa caucus is less than 2 weeks away, and the Republican candidates who are still in the race for the White House are making a last-ditch pitch to voters. That's where we find CBN's Matt Galka, who's traveling in Des Moines.
John, candidates continue to crisscross the state of Iowa, trying to get to as many undecided voters as possible. Now, polling has consistently shown that former President Donald Trump is in a dominating first-place position, with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley in a tight race for second. But one thing that those candidates have in common is that when they're meeting these voters, they're telling them this: polling will not decide the caucus, the voters will. We caught up with tech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy yesterday. He's polling in fourth, but that doesn't seem to bother him. He's done more events in Iowa than any other candidate.
I like the media narrative as I'm in fourth place in Iowa. Well, I think we're going to shock that system on January 15th, because a lot of the Iowans who are supporting us, they're not polled. In fact, I think many of those polls are manipulated. To the contrary, I will have done over 330 events here in Iowa by the time of the caucus. That is more than everyone else in the field combined. And I think the Iowans here, they reward hard work.
Of course, there's a big Trump factor, with some of the other candidates, like DeSantis, going after Trump's potential electability because of his legal troubles if he becomes the nominee.
So this is going to be constant. It's going to be a year of lawfare. It's going to be a year of all this other stuff. You know, we've got a better way to go forward. We're not going to have to worry about those issues. And then when I become president, I'm going to be able to address all the lawfare and all the weaponization. And we'll be able to end this stuff once and for all.
Now, Trump isn't ignoring Iowa either. He has multiple rallies planned this weekend as we head into the final stretch run before the caucus on the 15th. In Des Moines, Iowa, Matt Galka, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Matt. Well, among the most influential group of GOP voters in Iowa is evangelical Christians. A major expert on that voting bloc and an influential leader himself is Bob Vander Plaats, president and CEO of the Family Leader, considered a kingmaker in GOP statewide politics. CBN chief political analyst David Brody recently got his take on the 2024 race.
Where is all of this now? In other words, how do you see the race in Iowa specifically?
If Trump wins and wins going away, it'll be a hard thing to stop him at that point. Yeah. But if DeSantis were to beat Trump here, which I believe is very plausible, or come in a very close second here, I think Iowa will have done its job then. And what I mean by doing its job is give America a choice. And once America has a choice, decide, do you want the former president or do you want Governor DeSantis? But now you have a choice. And that's where I feel very comfortable about. You know, let's give America a choice.
Trump calls himself the victim, you know, of
Sure.
this weaponization of government.
Yep.
Now, if it was Trump alone, it would be one thing. Oh, you always think you're a victim. But in this case, you got pro-lifers who feel victims of the DOJ. You've got parents at school boards who feel victims of the DOJ in terms of the weaponization. It seems like there's more credibility.
I believe his indictments have been like a super PAC for him. They just kept benefiting his campaign. I mean, I think Trump said, I just need 1 or 2 more indictments and I'll be the nominee. And part of that, he wasn't joking. But then I think once America takes a deep breath and analyzes the situation, the best friend of former President Trump might be a President DeSantis. Somebody who can actually do something about this. Because these things are not going away. Even if he becomes President of the United States, it'll be under this cloud. And so the thing is, can you carry people with you in the Congress, in the Senate, governorships, and other places? I think DeSantis can do that.
It seems like Trump does have this Teflon quality that he can do this and yet not pay any sort of political consequence
Well,
for
he
it.
does have a Teflon quality. And from the standpoint of, he can call people names, but if you call him a name, all of a sudden everybody else has got to pay, right? He can do things that others can't do. It's kind of like you're in an orbit of one. Anybody else that gets close to that orbit, you're gonna get scorched and burned. I think the polls are overhyped, and they may be true, but I don't believe they're to be true. Everybody I talk to, and I think I have a good pulse on it, they all say the same thing. They respect Trump for what he did in his administration, but they're exhausted by him, and they're looking for an alternative. And so if DeSantis shocks the nation and perhaps the world on January 15th, which I think he's set up to do, Iowa's always broken late. You think Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, Ted Cruz, all broke late. And none of them were even close to where DeSantis is right now.
When I think of Iowa, of course, I think fondly of Mike Huckabee back in the day. Mike Huckabee's a big Trump supporter today. You obviously have, but you're great friends, I'm assuming.
Sure.
Really good friends with Mike. That seems to me to be a bit of a microcosm is the question I want to ask, which is what's kind of going on within the conservative Christian world, if you will, because there does seem, Trump is definitely kind of shown as when he came onto the scene, there seems to be a fissure, a split. Something's happening within the body of Christ, if you will, politically.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think Mike Huckabee's an outlier because he became a Trump supporter when Cruz overtook Huckabee.
Right.
And so then he is stuck with Trump. And, you know, Trump appointing Sarah and Sarah being governor today, it's a natural fit. So Mike Huckabee's an outlier.
Right.
But the bigger question is, I think even in the evangelical world, the faith world, there's this element of we need a disruptor. Things are not going the way the things should be going. And then you say, but Trump today's not lining up with us on the issues, on the sanctity of human life, whether it be on the gender stuff. Can you define what a woman is? I mean, there's a lot of things that he's just not lining up with us on. They're like, but we need a disruptor. Okay, but if you if you have a disruptor, you also need a fixer as well. And so I tell people all the time, this is not against Trump. I still consider Trump to be a friend of mine. And you can trust the wounds of a friend, the Proverbs say, okay? So with me not endorsing him, it's not against him. It's about the future of this country. And it's that it's so crucial that we win again. And I just happen to believe, my fear is this country has made up its mind on the former president. We need a win in 2024.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
God bless.
And David joins us now. David, great interview. So Bob Vander Plaats seemingly goes out of his way to not disparage former President Donald Trump while bringing every question back to his support of Governor Ron DeSantis for the Republican nomination. David, the question is, could the Florida governor beat Donald Trump in Iowa?
I don't see it, John. I mean, Donald Trump, poll after poll, up 30, 40, 50. I mean, choose your number. It's hard. This is an unusual situation, John. As you know, you and I have been in this business covering this as long as, I don't know, I think we both feel like Methuselah at this point. And every time Iowa becomes a big deal when Bob Vander Plaats and others endorse certain candidates. I mean, Ron DeSantis has the endorsement of Bob Vander Plaats and the governor of Iowa, and he's still trailing. So it might help at the margins, but the sad part for DeSantis is this game isn't at the margins right now in Iowa, and that's the problem.
Well, David, you also asked Bob about the spiritual state of the country. How does that factor into the 2024 election?
Well, this is not a Mike Huckabee Iowa election. This is not a Rick Santorum Iowa election. Both, of course, won back in the day in Iowa. This is more of a populist, spiritual factor, if you will. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you factor in populism, what you have is you have a lot of evangelicals right now, a lot of Christians who are very frustrated with the weaponization of government, the fact that pro-lifers are under attack, Catholics have been under attack from this DOJ, and you just go down the list, and Donald Trump plays into that. So I think you have a different phase of a culture war going on here, and that's why Donald Trump is doing very well, because it's a weaponization culture war issue rather than a traditional culture war issue.
Shifting to the Democrats, the president's campaign has long talked about Biden economics, but President Biden's first campaign speech to kick off the official start of 2024 is in Valley Forge, symbolizing the fight for democracy, highlighting the January 6th attack on the Capitol. David, is that a winning strategy?
Well, it's his only strategy. That's the bottom line here. I mean, he can't run on his record economically. People are hurting. Can't run on immigration, clearly. And you go down the list. Afghanistan was a debacle, and his numbers in the polls reflect it. So what do you run on? Well, you run on demonizing MAGA. You run on demonizing Donald Trump and that ilk, if you will. And you hope that gets you over the finish line. That's the play, John. Let's be honest, pure and simple. It's interesting, though. There is a projecting going on here to a degree. Joe Biden saying Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and yet it's Joe Biden's DOJ that is trying to keep Donald Trump off the ballot from running, and also, of course, indicting him, in essence, arresting him because he did have a mugshot. So it's just kind of interesting the way Biden is putting this, even though Donald Trump can make the same case against Joe Biden.
I just want to make a point of clarification. That mugshot came out of Georgia, not one of the federal cases. All right, David Brody, CBN chief political analyst, getting in his frequent flyer miles. Thanks for fitting time for us today, David.
Thanks, John.
Coming up, the end game in the Israel-Hamas war, even as fears emerge of an expanded conflict in the region. Welcome back. The Israeli government has released a plan for post-war Gaza. Defense Minister Yaakov Gallant shared the details during a press briefing this week. It's the first public blueprint for the future, although still it's subject to change. At the moment, it includes ongoing Israeli military control of the overall security situation, a task force led by the United States to rebuild Gaza, Egyptian control of the main civilian border crossing, and a Palestinian entity in charge of governing Gaza. Meanwhile, the Israeli military remains committed to destroying Hamas. A recent raid uncovered a branched subterranean network connected to an underground weapons factory.
There were a number of trap doors to make it difficult to get into. Behind the doors were explosive materials, machines, and other tools from which they created long-range rockets and other means of warfare used for carrying out terrorist operations for years on the territory of the State of Israel.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel for the fourth time in 3 months, expected to focus on preventing the Israel-Hamas war from engulfing the region. Well, as the war rages on, Israelis on the front lines are getting an assist from right here in the United States, as a network of retired American special operators who met in a business program are now working to help their Israeli counterparts get the support and supplies they need to take down Hamas. CBN National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke has that story.
Version Bravo is an entrepreneurship program designed to bring together retired U.S. and Israeli Navy SEALs and help them translate their unique military skills into the business world. But when Israel went to war, the relationships formed by these special operators have proven to be invaluable.
We have different channels where guys can communicate with one another where, everyone used it a little bit differently. Some guys chose to update on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, say, hey, this is what happened this week, just checking in, want to let you guys know, or hey, I need help, connecting to this type of company or an investor that invests in this space. Can anyone help out?
After October 7th, Version Bravo Global Director Nuri Golan, a retired Israeli Navy SEAL himself, noticed a shift. Business networking went on the back burner, and the training that developed as special operators resurfaced.
I got texts from almost every single alumni who was asking, how can I help? From like helping with equipment to doing things a lot, like wanting to come and actually physically be there and help out in the country.
Retired U.S. Navy SEAL Rory Grayman heard Israel needed night vision goggles. With a supplier only an hour away, he jumped in the car and personally tested them out.
Those guys are letting us know that, hey, we're getting deployed to, we're in Gaza, or, hey, we're looking for this help. And there's no hesitation on any of the U.S. guys' part to try to help out however they can.
Grayman believes every Israeli member of his Version Bravo cohort is now back in active military service, and his own background gives him a pretty good idea of what they're dealing with.
War is definitely tough. I've had 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan myself. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of fear, and getting any of that help offered to you, through any source is something that was what I appreciated when I was in.
Nathan Wilkins, also a retired U.S. SEAL, believes the bond with his Israeli counterparts goes deeper than just shared military experience.
We're praying for each other. We're encouraging each other and supporting when they needed it.
From his vantage point, Golan says despite all Version Bravo has already accomplished, it's the relationships that inspire him the most.
We're really excited about the future of this program. We know that the impact that we can see immediately, forget about the businesses, which obviously that's like the core thing, is helping guys get their businesses off the ground. But the strength of the relationships that we're seeing built and bringing the communities together, to me, is worth every ounce of effort that we put in.
Version Bravo first launched in 2020. They plan to welcome the 3rd annual class once many of the veterans serving in the war in Gaza are home. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Caitlin. The last job numbers of 2023 are out, what they may foretell for the economy in 2024 when we come back. Welcome back. Focusing now on the economy. Heading into 2024, the United States job market appears to be strong, according to the last jobs report of 2023. The December stats cap a year of consistently strong labor market growth and a low unemployment rate, even as persistently high inflation remains. The economy added 216,000 jobs last month, and the unemployment rate is holding steady at 3.7%, according to the Labor Department. Well, with us now is Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst and Washington Bureau Chief at Bankrate. Mark, it's always great to see you. So what's the big takeaway from today's strong numbers? Are we clear of a recession?
Good to be with you, John. I think what we can say about this latest snapshot regarding the U.S. job market is that the economy proved to be stronger and more resilient than expected in 2023 with the December numbers, which are subject to future revision. And most of the revisions with respect to the hiring numbers have been coming down in the rearview mirror. So let's keep that in mind. But 2023, with respect to the job market and economic growth, really surpassed expectations. Of course, the thing that has been bedeviling consumers and businesses and really the breadth of the economy has been persistently high inflation, which has come down, but still robbed consumers of about 1/5 of their purchasing power. And so they're still smarting over that.
So what about the point of recession? I know there's been a lot of talk over the last year that we might avoid one and we might have a soft landing. Do you think the numbers portend potentially steering clear of a recession?
When it comes to economic data, John, the status quo, or essentially what we know at the moment, is no guarantee of what happens in the future. And it's an important question. It's one I think that, for example, you and I have been talking about for at least 2 years now. And by virtue of the surveys that we do of economists at Bankrate, they've been talking about the elevated risks of a recession for the U.S. economy really for 2 years now. But as we speak, the U.S. has dodged that. Will it do that forever? No, absolutely not. And in fact, the latest survey we published in the recent days indicated that economists collectively put those odds at about even when we're asking them about the risk of a recession on a percentage basis over the next 12 months. They put it at collectively 45%, so just shy of 50-50. So we will have a recession at some point, but let's remember the last two that we had in this country were real doozies. We had an unemployment rate of 10% in late 2009, 14.7 in the early part of the pandemic. And we can hope that whenever that does occur, the next one will not be nearly so severe.
You talked a little bit about purchasing power, how it's been decreased. I want to ask you, though, how might the report affect things like interest rates? Do you think it'll cause the Fed to leave rates where they are or potentially even raise rates to compete with the strong indicators in the economy?
Good question, John, and that's of keen interest to us at Bank Rate, since ultimately our bread and butter is following interest rates and with respect to the Fed interest rate policy. And the widespread consensus is that the Fed is done raising interest rates. And the Fed itself indicated at the December policy setting meeting that it expected to be cutting rates in 2024. Now, looking at this report today with an increase in earnings, which is good news for workers, as well as the relative stability of the job market, some investors may be led to think that the Fed is less likely to cut rates soon. But I think it's still the consensus that we could see the Fed cutting rates by the midpoint of the year. I think the main takeaway is we've seen a peak in rates.
Mark, we're going to have to leave it there. Mark Hamrick with Bank Rate, thank you so much, and Happy New Year to you.
Same to you, my friend. Thank you, John.
Coming up, first responders deliver a Christmas miracle and then some. Well, finally tonight, first responders in Volusia County, Florida went above and beyond the call of duty, saving one family's Christmas. When police responded to a vehicle crash on Christmas morning, they found a car in a ditch partially under 3 feet of water and worked quickly to help a mother and her three children out of the vehicle. The family suffered only minor injuries, but their Christmas presents were still in the car. That's when first responders went the extra mile, using a ladder to retrieve gifts, drying them off, and in some cases even replacing them. The deputies and firefighters then personally delivered presents to the family in the hospital. Not just a Christmas miracle, but a good deed with good cheer. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.